Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on the top 4 security validations for a remote workforce. I'm Grant Swanson, the Director of Demand Gen at SafeBreach, and with me is our Head of Product, Yotam Ben Ezra, who will be giving a live product demo and a short intro to SafeBreach. We also have a guest speaker who is the CISO from Blue Cross Blue Shield, Yaron Levy. Welcome, Yaron.
Thank you, Grant. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I wanted to do today is to provide a perspective about some of the threats that are top of mind for my team, as well as what I'm hearing from fellow CISOs in the community. So I want to start with a quote from one of the greatest poets, Mike Tyson, who said, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." And where we are today, it feels like we got punched in the mouth. And the reality for most of us is that we don't have a plan, and we're not even ready to deal with the issues that we have right now at scale. Some will call it a perfect storm or a black swan. And the reality is that as humans, we usually are not very good at predicting and managing risks. It is safe to assume that most of us would have dismissed this type of threat in the past as very unlikely. I'm in Kansas City, and as of this week, our entire area is under shelter-in-place orders. Everyone are working from home. Schools are closed. Kids are at home. My daughter is back from college, and my dog is really excited about having everybody at home because she wants to play all the time. But definitely we can do it, but it's an adjustment for all of us. For the most part, what we're seeing out there is mass panic from most people, from most organizations. Many organizations not only have inadequate plans, they don't have plans at all, and they really scramble to function. There's a lot of uncertainty. We see things change every day. New orders from local authorities, clients and vendors scaling back on operations, third parties unable to meet contractual obligations, and many of them turn into the force majeure clause in their contract. And with all of that, there's often an increased pressure on the security teams to get out of the way. So from security perspective, the question is, what should we do? And then how do we make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater? So in this new reality of everyone working from home, we need to consider our regular attack surface, plus the threats that exploit weaknesses in our new reality. On my team, we dedicated a decent amount of time to intelligence and collaboration with other organizations through HISAC, InfraGard, and others, as well as leveraging our personal networks in the community. Phishing continues to be top of mind for us and one of the major attack vectors. We already observed a significant uptick in phishing emails that impersonate legitimate sources, as you can see from the World Health Organization and others. There's also a significant increase in registration of domains that are used for malicious activity. We saw several websites that mimic the Johns Hopkins map. The link to these websites often distributed through social media, and people keep sharing them to their friends and so on. And not only the information on those websites is wrong, oftentimes those websites are used to serve malware. There are many organizations out there that were not prepared to work from remote and do not have mobile devices like laptops, for example. Employees need to use their home computers that usually are not adequately patched, don't have any anti-malware or EDR on them, and there is no way to monitor these devices. Not to mention no way to protect the device against data leakage or anything like that. And lastly, the home networks do not provide the same level of protections as enterprise networks. So traffic out is almost always allowed from the network. Many routers are old and unpatched, and it is usually pretty easy to set up a rogue device outside of an employee house and man in the middle of their sessions if you really want to. So with that, I will hand it over to Yotam to discuss how to implement and test the home users' defenses.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And let's go directly into the top 4 things. And so the first thing we want to focus on is endpoint controls. The reason for this is that this is probably the most likely control to be relevant at the home. We have a home network. It is less protected by network controls. At the same time, we have a connection to the corporate network via the VPN. And so this is the first point which we can get a hold with. The relevant techniques to look at are basically, first of all, infiltration. So we want to monitor for infiltration via email, via drive-by. Those phishing campaigns might generate drive-by downloads of malware and other malicious content onto the host itself. We also want to monitor for infections on the host. So it could be file or fileless malware. It could be execution of malware patterns. And those can all be mitigated by the relevant endpoint control, so antivirus, EDR, anti-malware. One other thing to keep in mind is the unknown nature. So there are a lot of already known attacks, but in order to make sure that we are also monitoring for the unknown attacks, we want to look at various activities around file system registry process dynamics for suspicious activities. So overall host actions refers to that. So endpoint controls. The next thing to look at is obviously the VPN. So we will probably have a much noisier VPN connection, which will be harder to monitor because we have so many more users connecting. At the same time, we know that in the recent months, there have been several exploitation campaigns against VPN-related vulnerabilities. And so we want to make sure that patching is up to date on the VPN, and we want to monitor for exploitation as a main item. The next thing to look at is segmentation. And so we want to make sure that the segmentation controls around VPN connection are configured properly. We are probably expected to generate more VPN-related segments because of the increased capacity. And this calls for higher complexity and possible misconfiguration. Of course, users connecting through the VPN normally are assigned different segments. And there are various techniques to exploit there, basically reaching higher priority items within the network. And so the first one, which was also seen in the wild a lot recently, is the brute force. So we want to monitor activity for authentication attempts. Overall relevant protocols, we saw a lot of RDP brute force related activity recently, but that doesn't mean it cannot happen on other protocols. So the recommendation is to go for a wider scope there. Malware propagation in general is something to look at. So network controls, which are at the boundary of the corporate network, will be monitored for malware propagation, and also remote exploitation here as well. So if we have services and we want to make sure that we have the right network controls for exploitation. So various techniques to look at there. Last thing to look at is data leak. Probably because of lack of endpoint controls, we will be relying for those that have a present EDR on the EDR functionalities for prevention of leakage of information. There are a couple of other options, backhauling the remote internet traffic rather than splitting tunnels. If there is a challenge in capacity perspective, someone can consider using a cloud-based VPN service or things that can scale higher. The other option is to use virtual desktop interfaces, and those will reinforce basically the ability to prevent data exfiltration. We want to monitor on the attacker side two things on the internet connectivity side. So first of all, the ability to exfiltrate data. This can be towards any drop point, but also towards public cloud storage services. And on the other hand, command and control communication. this divides to non-command and control domains, but also command and control communication behavior. And so it is more recommended to have the ability to monitor for communication behavior towards the internet, such that unknown command and control destinations will also be picked up if they are relevant. So 4 areas we want to look at, but the question is, how do we validate? So say we've taken all those steps or possibly part of them, and we want to look at the risk and the efficacy of our current status. Can either be in order to help generate the plan for the next most viable steps, or just to report the current risk level or the current situation. And so basically, we propose breach and attack simulation in order to validate that. And for those of you who are less familiar with the space or with safe breach in general, the way it works is that we are able to simulate all of those attacker techniques across the network in order to test the defenses. And then we have various ways to visualize your exposure based on the data that is collected, with very detailed explanations of how it works, where the risk is concentrated, which helps basically contextualize around how the things that we are doing reflect our position versus the threats we're looking at. And then various ways to holistically remediate using insights and recommendations coupled with the data that's needed in order to update security control configurations and eventually help defend the enterprise. And so specifically for the remote workforce validation, how do we test this using SafeBreach? So the first part is to deploy the simulator. So assuming you either have a simulator deployed representing the corporate side or the users on the corporate side, or users connecting via the VPN, or you don't have them. If you don't have them, you would need to deploy them. You can get our help in deploying them as well. But it's a very simple process, a very quick installation. You will, this Monday, already have a plan, a test plan associated with our recommended set of attacks in order to validate a remote workforce, which includes all of those 4 aspects which I mentioned. And what you'll have to do is to assign the simulators that you want to look at to this plan, and then basically click a button and run the plan, which will result in a ability to explore the results using our Results Explorer capabilities, whether as a heat map or as a detailed results, ability to view remediation insights, and so prioritize list of actionable items you can do in order to reduce the associated risk, and also an exportable report which quantifies the risk level in each of those areas and is already packed into the, or pre-packed into the environment. So let's quickly demonstrate how it looks like in the platform. So going into my dashboard here, I already have a representative view of the different segments in my network, and I have my corporate user here, which was possibly in the corporate and now is connecting via VPN. I can see that I have a very quick view of the status of this user. But I can also look at the test which is specifically done for that user. I will get a breakdown of exactly what's the number of attacks and the portion of attacks out of this use case that are blocked. What is the potential for this user to get 2 different important segments in the network? I can see here that I have exfiltration as an item to look at because these are the most successful attack types. And I have malware propagation in the network also in between those that I probably want to look at. I can now go into the detailed result and start looking at what they mean, what was prevented, what was detected. I can break them down by the different attack phases. So let's look at host level, for example. I can see the different capabilities or the different attacks that were simulated and what was the results. I can filter. So I see I stopped some here. This specific demo environment doesn't have an endpoint control, and I see that I'm very successful in doing the endpoint-related attacks. This can also be exported, but I can go and look at specific insights for that user. So if I go to insights here, quickly filter by the corporate user target, and I will get immediately I will get a list of mitigations or mitigation suggestions that I can look at. So all of them relate to the corporate user segment, and I have the data associated with each one of them here. I can export this data either as a prepackaged directly for specific controls or as a generic export from SafeBridge, which can be adapted to any endpoint control and basically update those artifacts in order to improve my security. The next thing I can look at is I can look at the heat map of what is this, what is my overall posture versus the MITRE ATT&CK framework. As we were focusing on endpoint controls, I can look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework and basically identify the techniques and areas which will be relevant here. So discovery was an example, maybe DLL search order hijacking is another example, hidden files, so this will be a suspicious host action which I'm currently probably not monitoring, I completely missed it. And so I can gain a deep, as deep as I want, understanding of what is the security posture across that specific segment. Obviously, I can include here more segments and get a wider lens on how things look. I can also look at the report. I will go to known attack series and we look at the remote workforce risk report. And I will get a breakdown of each of the phases that we mentioned. So network-based infiltration and the risk level associated with that, then lateral movement, then infection on the host level, host actions, and external communication and data exfiltration. All of that will be broken down for me based on the simulations that were performed. So this was a demonstration of how it works. And we can now move to basically look at where we are in terms of getting this onboarded into the environment. And so here it's worth to mention that SafeBridge customers are already covered. You will have the pre-canned report already included in the platform today. And the plan for remote workforce validation will be onboarded onto the platform this Monday. And so deploying the simulators, playing the plan, and then looking at the reports and understanding where you're at with regards to a remote workforce. Another thing which is worth mentioning, we have a dedicated SafeBridge team which is positioned for quickly spinning up simulators and running the remote worker set of simulations and producing the report for you. So if you need help with getting this onboarded and getting to work on this, I'm sure everyone is pretty busy those days. And so we are more than willing to help with that. So reach out to us and let us know. So I will turn over now to Grant to summarize or maybe to take a few questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Yotam, for the demonstration. We have a few questions coming in from the audience, and I'll ask them in the order that they were received. Yotam, the first question is for you. Do I have to deploy this on remote employee desktops?
Yeah, you can decide whether you want to deploy it on all employees, on key employees, or on a representative set of employees. And also, we can help you with a deployment. SafeBridge customer success team are offering their service at enabling and actually running and deploying the testing for you.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question that just came in, do I need to use the test plan for all of the use cases, or can I test just a single use case?
Yeah, you can separate into the different use cases very easily in the planning capability. So let me just go quickly into the demo to show how it works. So if I go to planning here, all our customers, as I said, will have a pre-defined plan here, which they just have to assign simulators to. And so here I can use the ability to select by attack type in order to separate. So say I want to go for the command and control. If I just filter by command and control here, the entire plan will be automatically filtered for the relevant selected command and control attacks. If I want to add some exfiltration to that, let's say a cover channel exfiltration and the other exfiltration option to cover the data leak use case, I can have those three selected. The plan updates automatically, and then I can run only this use case. And that's pretty much it. And so any attack type that is mentioned in our presentation can be filtered out from the planning capability.
Excellent. Thank you, Yotam, and thank you, Yoran. So this concludes our webinar today. If your question wasn't answered, we will address it immediately after the end. Thank you for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.